So our topics, we're going to talk about just how Social Security works. How's your benefit calculated? What makes you eligible for Social Security? We'll talk about all the fine print, things like if you claim Social Security and you work prior to full retirement age, how they'll take away some of your benefits. We'll talk about how Social Security is taxed. We're going to talk quite a bit in the second half of the presentation about how you get more out of your Social Security benefits. And then we're going to talk in general terms about how you get the most from your retirement, how you put all of these pieces together, including your Social Security benefit, so that you've got the most secure retirement that you possibly can. So the information I'm going to give you tonight is essentially the Social Security rules as they sit today. Now, they very well could change in the future. And in fact, there's been some discussion about the trust fund going broke, things like that. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And I just wrote a blog on our website a couple weeks ago about some of the risks with Social Security. So, will the rules change at some point? Yes, they probably will. For our grandkids and our kids, they're not going to change for those of you who are on this webinar, because you're just too close to retirement, and they're not going to change the rules this late in the game for you. So these rules are pretty concrete for you. Now, there have been proposals about changes to Social Security. Just in the last few weeks, there's been a proposal to eliminate what's called the windfall elimination provision, or the guaranteed pensions offset, some penalties for people that work outside of Social Security. There's been for several years now a proposal called Social Security, I think it's Social Security 2001, where they want to increase benefits. They want to increase the Social Security tax. 2 years ago, there was a bill called Save Our Social Security, or SOS, where they're going to change the Social Security age till age 70. So there's a lot of changes that could be on the horizon, but again, none of them are going to impact you. And I think you can be pretty confident that the rules we're going to talk about are going to apply to your retirement. So let me start with some numbers here. This isn't a lottery ticket. This is some numbers that are very important in the context of Social Security. So Social Security, as we go through the presentation, you'll see it's a very important benefit. It's really complicated in terms of coming up with the right strategy, and it's a meaningful benefit. So I'll start with the number 40. That's the percentage of income, retirement income, that the typical U.S. retiree receives from Social Security. So for the average American, almost half of the retirement income is going to come from Social Security. So it provides kind of that floor, that base for you to live off of during retirement. So that's a pretty big number. The next two here, the complicated, depending on the benefit time frame you pick, you could get anywhere as little as 70% of your benefit to as high as 132% of your benefit. So there's a wide range of benefit payments that are available to you, and that election determines that, which brings me to 192, which is for a typical married couple. That's kind of the average number of options you have. You could take Social Security anywhere between age 62 and 70, any month in between. Your spouse can do the same thing. So if you add all that up, you've got like 100+ options in terms of when you turn on your Social Security. And then 365, so this is very important. Once you make that decision to turn on your Social Security benefit, you have 1 year, 365 days in order to change your mind. If you go beyond that, that decision you've made, whether it's to turn it on early or whatever it is, you're now stuck with that for the rest of your life. And so it's a very important decision. The last number there, 111,000. We're going to show you some examples, some real life case studies in this webinar where that decision, right or wrong, can impact you by well over $100,000. So making the wrong decision can cost you over $100,000 in Social Security benefits over your life or your spouse's life. So Social Security rules are extremely complicated. The benefit is meaningful to you. We're talking sometimes 6 figures in terms of a difference. And once you make the decision, you're done with it. So you've got to get it correct. So we're going to use Bob and Joan as our case study tonight. So Bob and Joan are 66. Bob receives $2,500 a month in benefits. Joan receives $1,250 a month in benefits. So combined, they're getting roughly $3,750 a month, or about $45,000 in Social Security benefits. So this is a very typical client that would be on Social Security. So what do we know about Social Security benefits? A, we know they're guaranteed by the US government. So this is probably the one asset you have that you don't have to worry about it going away. It's, you know, there's been pension plans that have gone away, you know, their stocks have become worthless, things like that. You're going to get your Social Security checks. They're guaranteed by the US government. They're also payable for life, so you can't outlive your Social Security benefit. And if you're married, they continue on for your spouse's life as well. And they have built-in cost of living raises to them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And as I mentioned, there's multiple options for claiming Social Security, anywhere between 62 and 70. So you're going to get your Social Security checks every month. You're going to get them for your life, and you're going to get cost of living raises when we have inflation. So one way to look at Social Security is as an asset. Not much different than your IRA or your 401k or your investment portfolio or anything else. So if we're going to look at it that way, how much money would we need to have sitting in some kind of investment account that would generate $45,000 a year to start, that's guaranteed not to be outlived, and would have cost of living raises? I mean, is that number 500,000? Is it 750? Is it a million? Is it more than a million? One way to look at that is using something called the 4% rule. So this is kind of a rule of thumb that's been around for 30 some odd years now. It has some validity. There's been a bunch of studies done by academics, and kind of the idea behind the 4% rule is if you take your typical retiree couple, age 65, married couple, they've got your basic, 60-40% portfolio, 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. These studies said, okay, so if we assume that we need at least 30 years of income, so we can't outlive it, what's the safest withdrawal rate we can take from that portfolio every year with inflation raises and not really have a high probability of running out of money? And the study that initially came out was about 4%. And there's been several studies since, and they're all between 3.5% and 5%. So the analysis works out pretty well. It's a pretty good rule of thumb, as kind of a starting point for figuring out how much income you need. So if we apply that 4% rule to that $45,000 a year, Bob and Joan would need to have a little over $1.1 million sitting in some kind of investment to throw off that exact same income and have a reasonable probability that it's not going to be depleted before they pass away. So if you look at a Social Security that way, your Social Security benefit's a pretty important asset. It might be your biggest asset, or it's at least right up there with your home equity and your retirement plans. So you've got to get this decision correct up front, because we're talking meaningful dollars here. So another way to look at Social Security is it's part of that, what we call the three-legged retirement stool. It's like, okay, your paychecks have stopped. You're going to retire. Now, well, how are you going to replace your salary that you've given up? So it really kind of comes from three sources for the most part. The first one is your guaranteed income, which is what Social Security is. We already said you can't outlive it. You get it guaranteed. Another source of guaranteed income would be a pension. So if you're a teacher, or you've worked in a union, or something like that, you probably have some kind of pension, which also is a source of guaranteed income. And then some people may have annuities, lifetime income annuities, things like that they've purchased. So that kind of provides one leg of the stool, which is your guaranteed income. If that's not covering what you need, then the rest of it's going to have to come from retirement savings, whether that's your IRA, your 401k, your Roth IRA, whether it's just an investment portfolio. So the trend used to be you would have guaranteed income between Social Security and pensions. Employers started shifting that investment risk to the employee. So now you assume that risk, and so you have to have your retirement savings subject to investment risk on your own in your 401ks and IRAs. So that's the next leg. That's typically the biggest leg. And then finally, you may have other assets that you can use. Maybe you have a business that you could sell or that you can continue to run. Maybe you have some rental property, and so you have some rental income. A lot of people anymore, they're just continuing to work. They're not necessarily going to work at the job they had before, and maybe they're retiring from that job, but now they're retiring to something else. They have an encore career, doing something maybe they always wanted to do. They could just bring a little bit extra money in, keep them busy, so you can make some money from work. And then finally, maybe you have, a substantial amount of home equity that you could tap into, particularly true in, Southern California, where home values are, incredibly high. You may have home equity. So the idea here is you need to replace that income that you've lost through these three vehicles. And we're going to talk about how Social Security is one leg of that, how we make that leg as strong as we possibly can. So now another way to look at retirement is it's kind of like climbing a mountain. I'm a big outdoors guy, as is Blake. So we like to use this analogy where there's kind of two phases in your life here. So the phase one, you're climbing up that mountain, or you're in accumulation. And so you're just saving for that retirement. And then ultimately you'll hit the top of the mountain. That's your retirement age. And now you've got to come down the mountain, or you've got to start distributing your money and replacing that paycheck. So, this is, I think, a pretty appropriate analogy to use. So while you're still working and you're accumulating, you're going up that mountain, the focus is typically on growing your nest egg, getting as much as you possibly can before you need to stop accumulating and start spending. So our role as a financial advisor, when you're still in the accumulation phase, just kind of keep you on the path, keep nudging you up that hill, making sure that, you've got proper asset allocation, that you're contributing money to your retirement plans, that you're being as tax efficient as possible. So it's just slow and steady. Just keep pushing you up the hill, coaching you and counseling you on getting to the top of that mountain, and whatever, age that is for you in terms of retirement. Ultimately, though, you're going to reach the top of the mountain. You're going to reach that age or stage where, okay, I'm now going to, have work optional. I'm going to have my encore career. Or maybe you are just going to stop working altogether and just relax for a period of time. So you've reached the top of the mountain, however that's going to be for you. And so this is a picture of Mount Whitney here in California in the Sierra Nevada. You can raise your hand if you've climbed Mount Whitney. We usually have a couple people that have. So this is a picture of my son Brandon and I. I've climbed it a few times, but I was fortunate enough to do it with my son a few years ago. So this is us on the top of Mount Whitney. If you're not familiar with it, it's the highest mountain in the continental United States. So if you go to Canada, you go to Alaska, there are taller mountains, or even in Mexico. But in the lower 48, this is the big dog. It's roughly 15,000 feet high. It's not terribly difficult to climb. There's a hiking trail. It's 11 miles each way, so it's a 22-mile round trip. But the air's thin. There's this pictures were taken in September, about this time of the year a couple years ago, and you can see there was already snow on the ground. So it's an accomplishment. It's one of those bucket list things people like to do. So we reached the top of the mountain. That was 11 miles. We still had another 11 miles to go to get back. And so, you get tired, the altitude's bothering you. There's a lot of issues with, coming down the mountain. So now this is Mount Everest, which is literally twice as high as Mount Whitney, highest mountain in the world. It's 29,000 feet. So this one, obviously, people train for years. They spend, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to go there. Most people don't make it to the top of the mountain. Unfortunately, many people die either going up or going down. But the reality is about 80% of the deaths and injuries that happen on a mountain climb, like Mount Everest or Mount Whitney, occur on the way down after you've already reached the top. And the whole point of this analogy, it's the same for your financial life. So you've worked your way up. You spent years and years working and saving. You reach that top of the mountain, you take a breath and say, okay, I'm retired. I'm going on to my next stage of life. But now you face a bunch of risks you really didn't face when you're going up the mountain. And so our job as financial advisors when you're coming down the mountain is to keep you safe and make sure that something doesn't happen to you. And there's a bunch of risks that really don't matter that much when you're going up, but they matter a lot when you're coming down. The consequences are far more severe, you know, if something happens and you're running out of money because, you know, if you're in your 70s or 80s, you can't go back to work. Health may not allow you, you know, a bunch of things. So you've got to get it right and be safe and prudent on the way down so nothing bad happens. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these risks, and then we'll get into how Social Security can help you with each of these. So we're going to talk about taxes. We're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about healthcare, and we're going to talk about market risk. So when you reach that pinnacle and you're on your way down, the focus, and this is where we specialize, is on preserving that nest egg and asset distribution. How do we most efficiently, from a tax standpoint and from a volatility standpoint, et cetera, make your money last as long as it possibly can and provide you that income that you need as safe as possibly can. So let's start with taxes. And so it's a question I always ask in this seminar and some of our others is like, so how many of you think taxes are going to go up in the future? You can raise your hand. You know, okay, we had a couple people raise their hand. How many of you think they're going to stay the same? All right, how many think taxes are going down? Okay, so we got a mixed bag here. The answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that tax rates have changed on average about every 4 to 5 years. And that trend has been accelerating rapidly over the last couple of years. So if you think about it, you know, if you're going to be in retirement 25, 30, 35 years, you're going to see 6 or 7 tax law changes. And the way it's going now, you may see double that. It's hard to say. So, you know, a lot of people, the thinking is, oh, you get into retirement, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket. You know, that's not the case. It very well could be that you could be in a higher tax bracket in the future simply through tax law changes. And let me give you some examples here. So this is tax brackets from the 50s into, you know, the Reagan years, you know, the mid 80s. You could see there have been tax brackets as high as 92%. And for a long time, they hovered in the 70s. And then finally, with the Reagan Tax Act, they dropped below 50% for essentially the first time. Now, what we've had over the last, you know, 30 plus years, and tax brackets have been fairly stable, anywhere between, you know, 28 at the lowest to 39.6, and today we're at 37, based on the last major tax cut bill. And so you can see we're on the low end of the tax scale. Now, are we going to go back to 90% tax rates? I don't think so, but who knows? Who knows what the future is going to bring? So what I do know is we've got to anticipate that the tax rates are going to change. And that's why we focus so heavily on tax planning as part of your retirement planning. And so here's just some examples of changes that have been done in just the last few years. So we had the TCJA, the Trump tax cuts, which happened in 2017. Then we had the Secure Act, which the biggies that you probably know from there are the retirement distribution, required distribution age changed from 70.5 to 72. And you also had something that eliminated what we called the stretch IRA. We're going to talk a little bit about Secure 2.0 here in a second. And then we had all the COVID bills. So the CARES Act, the Appropriations Act, the American Rescue Plan, those all had to do with kind of saving the economy and providing safety nets to people during the COVID pandemic. Those were your rebate checks. You didn't have to take required minimum distributions. There's a whole slew of things. But you can see that's 5 different tax bills just in a 3.5 year period, essentially. And so what do we have this year? We've got a bunch of stuff floating around right now that you probably have heard of. The biggie is what President Biden was calling the American Families Plan, which just in the last couple days, Congress has essentially come out with their version of President Biden's proposal, quite a bit different than what was originally proposed by President Biden. So we're finally seeing what that tax could be. There's going to be changes to the estate tax. There's going to be changes to the capital gains rate, to expand the child tax credit, all kinds of different things. And we'll have a write-up on our website probably early next week on what the new changes look like, because it's vastly different than what we had written and talked about just a month or so ago. Then you have the Secure Act 2.0 that we'll talk about in a second. And then the one a lot of people ask about is the state and local tax cap. You know, if you're living here in Southern California, this impacts you because the most you can deduct in terms of your property tax and your state income tax is $10,000. We expected that to maybe be in this new Democratic tax proposal. It is not. There is a separate bill that talks about the SALT cap, probably not going anywhere. And if you want more information on all of these, we did a webinar just last month on the tax proposal. So you can go to our website and view that webinar and get more information. I'll just talk briefly about the Secure Act 2.0. So as I mentioned before, one of the big provisions of the Secure Act was your required distribution date, the date you're forced to start taking money out of your IRA and your 401k, et cetera, was changed from 70.5 to 72. The big one in the Secure Act 2.0 is now they're talking about changing it to 75. They get that people are living longer, they're working longer, and so they're going to raise the age where you have to take the money out. So, you know, what they've talked about, and there's a lot of support for this one, so it may actually get passed, is ultimately it would be age 75. For those of you that are right around, you know, you're getting closer to that age, it'll probably be 73. But ultimately it'll be increased. And there's some nice provisions in there. And again, if you want a lot more detail, you can go to our webinar we did last month and you can watch that. We'll have a lot more detail on Secure Act 2.0. So that's taxes. Obviously, you've got the risk that you aren't going to necessarily be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. And Blake's going to talk quite a bit about how important tax diversification is in retirement. The next one, which has really been off everybody's radar for a very long period of time, is inflation. Inflation remains low. Now, we've had a spike over the last few months because of pent-up demand from, you know, the COVID pandemic where everything was shut down and was being reopened. We've had some supply chain issues. So we've seen some spikes in prices in food, in gas, and all kinds of things. We frankly think that that's a temporary blip. That it's not going to be short-lived. In fact, just the numbers that came out yesterday kind of indicate that that's leveling off, and then we're not seeing inflation like we used to. But you know, probably most of you that are on this presentation can remember the days where inflation was high. I bought my first house in 1982, and my mortgage was 12.5%. And so people don't think about that. So when we're looking at projecting your retirement income, we have to assume some kind of inflation in there. Now, do I assume 4 or 5%? No. I don't want to unrealistically assume spending is going to increase every year, and we end up with unrealistic numbers, and you don't end up with the retirement you should. But we are going to assume that you're going to have some spending increases, at least for a period of time. And what we typically do is we look at the category, and for example, healthcare, inflation may be 5 or 6%. What other things, you know, your clothing purchases and things like that will probably actually decline and not increase. So we have to factor inflation into your projections. The good news is Social Security provides an inflation hedge that we'll talk about. So, you know, example of inflation, I'm sure many of you remember this movie, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And this came out 1969 roughly to 1970. The cost to see that at that time was roughly $1.20. I kind of remember going to see it for like 50 cents, and I got to see 2 movies. But the average, according to the CPI, was $1.20. Well, if we fast forward to, you know, the hot movie of the last couple of years, The Avenger, you know, now we're talking over $9 to see a movie. And I don't even want to think about what the cost of popcorn is these days. So that's an example of inflation. You know, as is gasoline. My first job was working at a Texaco gas station, pumping gas for 23 cents a gallon. And now we're back well over $4, even if you go to Costco to try and save money. So inflation has to be considered into this equation as well. So the next one is longevity. You know, people are living longer. The average life expectancy has gone up substantially, and this has had an impact on Social Security. We'll talk about when we get into the details. So those numbers you see for 2020, this is how many people we have that are age 100 today. So it's really not that big of a number if you think about it. We have 30+ million people living in the United States, roughly 90,000 or so are age 100. So it's not a huge number, but what I want you to look at there, particularly ladies, that 18,429, that's the number of men that are age 100 and still living. That 72,000 number is the number of women who are age 100 and still living. So there's definitely a disproportionate amount of women who live to age 100 rather than men. So again, we have to consider longevity into the equation. And for an example, in 2054, when a lot of us would be, you know, hitting that age 100 standpoint, there's got to be 600,000 people that are age 100 or later. So what does that mean? We have to factor a fairly long retirement in here. And we make conservative assumptions about what your longevity is going to look like based on actual discussions with you. You know, how's your personal health? What does your family health history look like? You know, what lifestyle things do you have? And we'll make reasonable assumptions. We're definitely not going to underestimate longevity, but at the same time, I don't think it does anybody a service to way overestimate longevity. Now, we're certainly going to stress test to see what happens if you live a long time and see if that impacts your planning. But, you know, we have to be pretty conservative about your longevity assumptions. And again, the good news, Social Security is guaranteed for life. You could be 120 and you'd still be receiving your Social Security checks. Next one's healthcare. And this one gets thrown around a lot with some scary numbers. For example, Fidelity, the investment company, every year they do a survey on the healthcare costs for an average 65-year couple. The last number they had was $280,000. And that's not including like nursing home, that's just their healthcare costs. So that's your health insurance premiums, your prescription drugs, all of the co-pays and stuff that maybe Medicare doesn't cover. I frankly think this is on the high side, and that number's, you know, not all that realistic, but it is a pretty hefty number that we have to factor in. And unfortunately, this is one area where inflation is still pretty prevalent. Those costs are increasing 5-6% per year. So we have to take into account your healthcare costs during retirement. We also have to look at what would happen if you need home health care or if you have to go to a nursing home. And the average nursing home stay in, say, Orange County is roughly $7,600 a month, or roughly $90,000 a year. And the average stay is 3 years. So we need to stress test your plan for what happens if one or both of you have to go into a nursing home for any period of time. What does that do to your plan? The other thing about healthcare that comes into play, particularly for a lot of people who would like to retire earlier than 65, is Medicare doesn't kick in until 65. So you can take Social Security at 62, but you're not going to get Medicare till 65. So how do you bridge that gap? What do we do for coverage? And this is one of the things we really have to do a lot of planning around, is like, you know, can you use COBRA through your employer for, you know, 18 months? Do we need to go to Covered California? Do we just continue working until 65? So this is one of those issues that really impacts your retirement. Now, there has been proposals that the government would lower the Medicaid age to age 60. Hasn't happened. It's just being kicked around. But this is one of the issues that we see for a lot of people. They want to retire earlier. It's like, what do we do for healthcare? How do we pay for that? Okay, so then the next one, and probably the biggest, is market volatility. What happens if we have a really bad market just as you retire? What we call the retirement red zone. So what we're talking about here is this period of 10 years, roughly 5 years right before you retire and 5 years immediately after you retire. If we have a bad sequence of markets, this could devastate your portfolio. And I'll show you an example here. So we've got Bob and Joan. They have $1 million nest egg. They're going to take that 5% withdrawal. So they're going to take $50,000 a year with inflation increases. So they're going to give themselves a pay raise. It's your typical 60-40 balanced portfolio. What we looked at here is What would this look like 10 years later if they retired in 1980, if they retired in 1990, and if they retired in 2000? And so let me show you what this looks like. So if they retired in 1980 and they're starting to take 50,000 a year out for those 10 years, so they're pulling over $500,000 a year from that portfolio. Not only have they not tapped at all into their principal, it's grown to 1.7 million, even with 50,000 a year plus raises factored in. So that looks pretty darn good. Now, if they retired in 1990, the same 10-year period, same withdrawals, it looks even better. They have an extra $130,000 sitting in their portfolio. But what if they had retired in the year 2000? Not only did they not make it 10 years and have anything left, they're in the hole almost $500,000. Now, the withdrawals are the same in these scenarios. The hypothetical rate of return on the portfolios is the same. What caused this huge difference in terms of running out of money or almost doubling your money in that 10-year period? It's what we call sequence of return risk. And so if we look over here in the 1980, 1999 period, you can see the S&P 500 here looks like a roller coaster ride at Magic Mountain. The one blip, 1987, and I started in the business in 1986, so I remember the crash of 1987. That was the worst year, and we had about a 10% drop. So now to make up a 10% drop, you only need 11% to get back to normal. And you can see this is why Bob and Joan would have ended up almost doubling their money during either one of those decades. But now if we go to the 2000, you can see what happens is we start the decade, we have the tech crash, we get pretty much right back where we started, and then we had the Great Recession. And now the market has looked great since. Now it looks similar to the chart on the other side. But the fact is, just to break even, Bob and Joan needed to go 13 years to get back to their initial starting point. And that's why if we're withdrawing 50,000 a year and the market's also declining, you end up with a spiral and you're out of money. And so the worst return during that period was a negative 38%. Now to recover from a 38% loss, you don't need to get 38%. You need to get 62% to get back to break even. So this is sequence of return risk. This is probably your biggest risk in retirement. And Blake's going to talk about strategies to kind of minimize this in the second half of the presentation. But this is your biggest risk. This is the one we need to avoid at all costs. So during that kind of 10-year period, what we need to focus on is not necessarily the return on your investment, but the return of your investment. So once we get through that retirement red zone, we can be a little bit more aggressive, but we really have to focus on preserving your principal during that first kind of tenuous 10-year period. So navigating the retirement red zone, what we look at is what we call a reduced risk glide path. So we're going to get a little bit more conservative during those 10 years. We're right before you start to enter retirement, right after, we're going to get a little bit more conservative. Now, once we make it through that, we can be a little bit more aggressive. But our focus is on cash flow planning. It's what we specialize in, is making sure you get the money you need through making sure you have cash so we don't have to sell investments when the market's down. And then we use what we call our frugal investor philosophy of using dividend paying stocks. So the focus is on being conservative during that period. And then also, this is where Social Security starts to come into play, is how can we use your Social Security benefit to kind of provide a floor for you so we don't have to spend as much of your investment portfolio during that retirement red zone period. So that brings us to Social Security. So, we talked about Social Security provides a source of guaranteed income. So that provides you protection from that market risk. If you're getting $45,000, $50,000, $60,000 of Social Security income, hopefully that's covering some of your basic living expenses, and we don't have to worry about selling some of your portfolio while the market's down. So it protects you from that market risk. You can't outlive it. So you live to 100, you live to 120, you'll keep getting your Social Security checks. So it protects you against longevity. And then you have cost of living adjustment. So it protects you against inflation. It's tied to an inflation index. So for example, last year, for the first time in a long time, Social Security recipients actually got a raise of about 1.3%. Now, because it's tied to an index and we've had a spike in inflation this year, the raise for 2022 is projected to be around a 6% increase. So if we have inflation, your Social Security benefit goes up and keeps pace. So that's really important. And then in terms of taxation, as we'll talk about, Social Security does provide some tax benefits, particularly in the state of California. So how does Social Security work? Now let's start drilling into the nuts and bolts of Social Security. So Social Security is essentially a pyramid scheme. It's what you have is you have the workers at the bottom, the younger workers that are paying in through Social Security taxes. And those taxes essentially get paid out to the workers that are in Social Security, and they're receiving their retirement benefits. So it was designed as a pyramid scheme, and it worked really well when it first started in 1935. The reason was the average life expectancy of someone in 1935 was age 60. Retirement age was 65. So you had 160 workers paying into Social Security for every one worker that was taking a check. So we had a bunch of money coming in and not much money going out, so it worked great. So what's the problem? As of 2020, life expectancy is now age 79. So now you have people that are going to collect Social Security checks for 12, 13, 14 years, and we only have 3 workers paying in for every one worker collecting checks. So the pyramid is starting to get a little top heavy and may tip over. And in fact, there was just an announcement that came out last week that the Social Security Trust Fund, which is in theory the fund that pays out Social Security benefits, is going to run out in 2033. And I just wrote a blog posting on this on our website last week. The last time we did this seminar earlier in the year, the fund was supposed to run out in 2034. The reason it dropped, COVID. We had far fewer people working, so we had far fewer people paying in, and that kind of exacerbates the fact that we didn't have that many people paying in to begin with. Now, a lot of people had said, the trust fund may run out as early as 2026. Well, yes, we had fewer people paying in, but we also had a spike in mortality, which helped to offset some of that. So, that's a scary thing. You probably heard headlines on it. As I mentioned in my blog article, it doesn't mean anything because Social Security almost went broke in 1982. The government just gave the trust fund a bunch of money. And there's no way in heck that the government is going to allow, people who are relying on Social Security as their main source of income and retirement to take a 22% pay cut. It just isn't going to happen. So they'll find a way to either just give them money or loan them money until, this whole trust fund is going to run out. Isn't a big deal. Now, at some point, someone is going to have to address the problem and fix this whole pyramid thing. As I mentioned, it's probably going to impact our kids and grandkids. They may not be able to take it until age 70, something like that. And they may have to pay more in Social Security taxes because they have to address it. But everybody is just terrified of trying to upset the main bloating block, which are baby boomers and retirees. So how do you get Social Security? You have to work at least 40 quarters, or the equivalent of 10 years. If you have, then you're eligible to receive your own benefit. If you don't have enough hours to qualify on your own, if you're married, you can still get a spousal benefit, but you can't get your own benefit. The minimum age you can start taking Social Security retirement benefits is 62. And we'll talk about the effect that has on taking it early. You have to have paid into the Social Security system. So if you worked as a teacher, and you were in like CalPERS or CalSTRS, and maybe you didn't pay into Social Security, that impacts you. Sometimes you paid into Social Security through various jobs, and other times you didn't. So you have to look at that. And as I mentioned, so the Medicare age stayed 65. We're going to talk about the retirement ages for Social Security benefits, Medicare is still age 65. It remains unchanged. So how benefits are determined? What they do is they take your 35 highest years, and if you go to ssa.gov and you look at your Social Security statement, it lists your Social Security wages for every single year you've worked. And you should do that. Go take a look at it, make sure there aren't any mistakes. So what they're going to do is they're going to take your 35 best years and calculate that income, what they call your average index monthly earnings. And from that, then they determine how much money you're entitled to in terms of Social Security benefit, what's called your primary insurance amount. We'll talk about that in a sec. And then the next thing that determines your benefit is the age you take it. So the initial concept is what's called the primary insurance amount, or PIA. And what that is they have a concept called full retirement age, which is the age you're technically supposed to retire. It used to be 65. It was changed in 1993. So now, depending on the year you were born, it's between 66 and 67. So that's the age you're theoretically supposed to retire. And so if you go to your Social Security statement, it says on there, you know, at full retirement age, your benefits $2,500 a month or $2,800 a month or whatever the number is. So that's what they expect you to receive. And that's the number they're using to kind of calculate the amount of money they're going to pay you over your lifetime. What I kind of call your bucket. So you have this bucket of money that they're going to pay you based on your 35 best years and then the age you take it. So that's step one. So you have your primary insurance amount. That's the amount you're supposed to get if you actually take it at full retirement age. Then it gets adjusted up or down based on when you take the benefits. So you could take it as early as 62. So that's between a 4 and a 5 year extra period that you're going to receive checks. Well, they're not going to pay you more money. As I mentioned, you have your bucket. They're going to pay it out to you. And if you take it early, then they're just going to lower your payment. So you, in theory, end up getting the same amount of money. So if you take it at 62, your benefit's going to be 25 to 30% lower than if you waited till full retirement age. The way I like to look at this is it's your 30-year mortgage. You know, if you take a 30-year mortgage, your house payment is lower than if you take a 15-year mortgage because you're paying the same principal amount. You're just paying it over a longer period of time. So you pay a lower amount. Now, the latest you can take Social Security, in theory, is age 70. And so now in this case, you're waiting 3 or 4 years before you take it. So they're going to pay you the same amount of money again, but now because you're taking it over a shorter period of time, you get a bigger paycheck. And in this case, it's anywhere between 24 to 32% higher. So think of that as your 15-year mortgage. If you're paying the same amount, but you're paying it over a shorter period of time, you have a bigger payment. Social Security works the same way. They're not going to pay you more. If you take it early, they're going to lower your payment, so you end up getting the same amount. If you take it later, they're going to raise your payment, so you end up getting the same amount. So you've got, you know, those 8 years, you could have anywhere between 70% of your normal benefit to 132% of your normal benefit. So I talked about before, that claiming selection comes into play here in terms of how much Social Security benefit you're actually going to receive. And we'll show you some examples of how that works in a few slides. So kind of back to Bob and Joan. Bob's full retirement age is 66, and we said he gets $2,500 a month at 66. His earliest age is 62. And so now he's going to take essentially a 25% haircut. And so now his benefits reduced to $1,875. If Bob decides to wait until age 70, now his benefits increase to $3,300. And you know, actuarially, all of these should be exactly the same. Now, the trick is people don't live to just actuarial life expectancy. Some people live longer, some people live shorter. And this is where it becomes more complicated, is figuring out, okay, which one's best for me? When should I take it? Should I delay it? Should I take it earlier? Should I take it at full retirement age? Anywhere in between? And then when you add in, if you're married and you've got a spouse, when do they take their benefits? That's how you end up with 190 some odd various options available to you. So that's your basic benefit. 35 best years, they come up with your primary insurance amount, which is the amount you're going to get, and then it's adjusted upward or downward based on when you take your benefits. So now let's talk about spousal benefits. So in our example here, Joan is receiving what's called a spousal benefit. So if you're married, your spouse can get the greater of their own benefit or half of the other spouses if that's higher. So Bob is receiving $2,500. Joan's own benefit, because she worked, was only $900. So she's going to get the greater of that $900 or half of Bob's, which would be $1,250. So she gets $1,250. The spouse has to be at least 62, and the benefit reductions apply. So if Joan's benefit is $1,250 for retirement age, she takes it earlier, it's going to be reduced. Now, one thing that has changed over the last few years is Joan can't turn on that spousal benefit unless Bob has turned on his benefit. It used to be you could actually do something called a restricted application, things like that. Those are long gone. So we can't turn on a spousal benefit unless the other spouse has turned on his or her benefit. Now, what about survivor benefits? What happens when one of you passes away? Now, I mentioned the general rule is you can't turn Social Security retirement benefits until 62. There is a difference for survivor benefits. You can turn them on as early as age 60. And again, they're not going to pay you more. So now if you're taking it, 6 or 7 years earlier, the benefit's even further reduced. But you can turn it on as early as 60. And the way this rule works is the survivor gets the greater of their own benefit or the deceased spouse's benefit. What's important there is one of the benefits is going to go away. And so I'll show you an example here in a second. But one of the benefits is going to drop off. And there are some strategies we can use where we can start with survivor and switch to their own and stuff. So, it's a situation we can analyze for you. So let's say Bob passed away at 72. The combined benefit's $3,750, right? $2,500 and $1,250. When Bob dies, one of the benefits is going to drop off, the lower one. So Joan's benefit would stop, and now she steps into Bob's shoes and she gets his $2,500. Well, that's still a 33% reduction in income. They were getting $3,750 before. Now Joan's only going to get $2,500. What does that do to your financial plan? Maybe that's okay. My 30 plus years of experience, a 33% drop in income is substantial. Most of the time, if a spouse passes away, you may see a 15 to 20% reduction in expenses. So we have to analyze, what does this do to the financial plan if one of them dies early? And what are contingencies do we have in place to make up for that lost income? So now let's talk about divorce. So we've talked about spousal benefits. We've talked about survivor benefits. There are some unique rules for divorced spouses in Social Security. So if you're divorced and you were married at least 10 years and you're still unmarried, then you can actually collect half of your ex-spouse's benefit if it's bigger than your own. So in this case, if Bob and Joan were divorced, Joan could collect that $1,250 or half of Bob's, but Bob wouldn't bother collecting Joan's because his benefit's already higher. So the rule is married at least 10 years and you remain unmarried. Some additional rules: remarriage ends that. So if Joan decided to get remarried, then she's going to step into the spousal benefit for her new spouse, or her to get her own benefit. Half of Bob's would go away. And kind of a unique thing here is multiple ex-spouses can receive benefits. So that divorced spouse's benefit doesn't impact the other spouse at all. And if you remember this guy, Johnny Carson, he's the poster child for this rule, because at one point Johnny had 3 wives all collecting benefit on his record. So he had his current wife, Joan, who he's still married to, 15 years. She's collecting your normal spousal benefit. Then he had 2 ex-wives, Joanna and Alexis, who were both married to Johnny more than 10 years. Neither one had remarried. So they were both collecting divorced spouse benefits. So Johnny's getting his own benefit, and then 3 wives are all receiving half of Johnny's. So the government lost money on Johnny Carson. But kind of the moral of the story here is, when you have a divorce situation, what's happening with the other spouse doesn't impact the other spouse's benefits at all. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the fine print. So first thing, Social Security benefits are taxable, and we'll talk about the rules there. So in California, they're tax-free, but for the IRS, you're going to pay income tax. One of the biggies is if you decide I'm going to take it early, but you keep working, they're going to reduce or eliminate your benefits. And then finally, if you've worked outside of Social Security, you're a teacher or something like that, you have a couple of provisions that will eliminate or reduce some of your benefits. Okay, so the way taxes work is if you make more than 25 single or 32 married, you'll pay tax on half of your Social Security benefit. If you make them more than 34 single and 44 married, you're going to pay tax on 85% of your Social Security benefit. The good news is in California, you don't have to pay tax on any of your Social Security. So you are getting some tax break. You don't have to pay state income tax. In your worst case is you're going to get 15% of your Social Security benefit income tax free. So there are some benefits. Where this becomes important is like if you're right around those thresholds. You know, if you make $31,999, you don't pay tax on any of your Social Security. You make $32,001, now you're paying tax on 50% of your Social Security. So it's again something we have to look at and project every year to make sure that we don't end up causing you a tax problem with your Social Security because you made $2 more than you should have. Working and collecting benefits early, this is when you need to know. So if you take benefits before your full retirement age, 66 or 67, then for every $1 you make over $18,960, or for every $2 you make over $18,960, they're going to take $1 of your Social Security benefits away. And the way this works is essentially you don't get any Social Security benefits until that reduction has been fulfilled. Then they'll start giving you benefits. Now, once you hit full retirement age, 66 and 6 months, 67, whatever that age is, you can work and make as much money as you want. You don't have that reduction. But if you're thinking about retiring early and maybe working, doing something different, or working part-time, you need to know about this gotcha rule because it could impact what you're going to do in your benefits. So let's say Bob starts an encore career. You know, we've already said he's getting $30,000 a year. Bob earns $50,000 doing some consulting at 65. His benefit under that formula is going to be reduced by $15,520. So he's not going to get a Social Security check until that number's been run out, and then he'll get Social Security checks again, but he'd only get $14,480 for the year. So in a situation like this, it probably doesn't make sense to take Social Security early, or at least you've got to look at it and figure that out. So now let's talk about how to get the most from Social Security, because this really is what's important to you is how do we get the most money in your pocket so you have a fulfilled retirement? One way to look at this is using what we call a Social Security maximization analysis. And this is a service we could provide you. We could look at what age would delaying Social Security or taking it early benefit you the most. Essentially, how long do you need to live before delaying makes the most sense for you? And here's a real life case study here. So the green line is taking your benefits at 62. The blue line is taking it at full retirement age of 66. The red line is delaying it till 70. So you can see with the red line, we don't have any benefits till 70, then they kick in. The green line, we start benefits earlier, but they're reduced. And then the blue line is what you're supposed to do. And so you can see in this example here, the kind of the crossover point is around age 78 to 80. And so if you think you're going to live longer than that, just from a numbers standpoint, this makes the most sense, delaying it. So in this example, if you waited till 70, we would have gotten $673,000 over your lifetime. At, assuming we lived out to age 86, and you would have only gotten $585 had you delayed or taken it early. So that's almost $100,000 difference by the claiming strategy. Obviously, the trick is you don't know how long you're going to live, but you can kind of just, a rule of thumb is if you're going to live out into your late 70s, you probably will end up with more in benefits if you delay Social Security. But that's just one way to look at it. It's like, what if you want to retire early? And spending all of your other income maybe isn't the best approach either. So let's look at another example where we have a married couple. So in this case, the green line is they both take it early. The blue line is no benefits until 70, and then they both take them. And then the red line is one of them takes it early and one of them takes it late. And this is a pretty common strategy that we'll use. And again, we model this through the maximization analysis. So in this case, if we took that one takes it at 62, the other takes it at 70, we end up with 700,000 out at life expectancy versus 600 for both taking it early. Again, it's a $100,000 difference. And so you can see this decision really has a big impact on how much money you're going to receive in Social Security benefits over your lifetime. The trick is, you know, what do we expect life expectancy to be? And then also, you know, if you want to retire earlier than 70, what do we have to live off of to bridge that gap? So I just showed you a couple examples where the wrong decision can cost you $100,000 or more. Very common. So it's critical to get that decision right. One of the ways we do that is to do a Social Security maximization analysis. Okay. So in terms of preparing for Social Security, first thing you should do is go to ssa.gov and pull your Social Security statement. They don't mail them anymore. So go and look at it. It'll tell you what your estimated benefit's going to be. It'll show you what your earning history is, and take a look at it and make sure it looks accurate to you. You know, as part of your retirement planning, do the Social Security maximization analysis. Come in, sit down with us. We can kind of run those scenarios for you. And then obviously, as you get closer to that retirement age, at age 65, you're going to need to sign up for Medicare, look at your Medicare supplement plan, sign up for Medicare, all of that. So that age is disconnected. Social Security age is 66, 67, Medicare age is 65. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Blake and let him talk a little bit more about just maximizing your retirement income and how Social Security fits into all of this. So Blake, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. So as we see here, but the real question is, how can you make your money last longer than you do? So in other words, how can you not outlive your money? We'll go to the next slide here. And you can do that by designing a plan to meet your goals. And we've talked about it a lot tonight, but managing that retirement red zone, those 5 years prior to retirement and the first 5 years in retirement, it's critical that you appropriately position yourself and mitigate sequence of return risk along the way. And through this is coordinating your cash flow. So what is that opportune time to claim your Social Security? Is it at age 62? Is it at age 70? Is it a mixture of both? If you're married, what if you're divorced? What if you're a widow? So there's a lot of things that go into that calculation. And then using bridging strategies as well. So if 62 looks like that desired retirement age and you want to claim your Social Security benefits at 67, how are you going to make up that income in the 5 years up until when your Social Security kicks in? How are you going to bridge that gap up until your Social Security kicks in? And then bucketing, flooring, and other cash flow approaches. So bucketing is a key concept that we employ for our clients. And in its simplest terms, you're matching the risk of your assets to certain years. So especially when you're in retirement, this is imperative, but you want to have at least 3 months to a few years in cash and short-term liquid instruments that you can easily access if you needed it. If a market declined and you needed to pull money, you want a short-term bucket to be able to sustain that while the market is declining. And from there, you also want to have a medium-term bucket, 3 to 5 years or so, where you're having bonds, other types of assets that can get you a little bit more growth compared to cash. And then finally, a long-term bucket, say 5 years and later, that holds stocks that historically outpace inflation. So having a mixture of a short-term, medium-term, and long-term bucket with your portfolio strategy. And then flooring is something that Jim talked about, but having a certain amount of your income be guaranteed, whether that be Social Security, pension, annuity, that covers your fixed expenses. So having a minimum floor is something that you should implement. And then proper tax planning through tax diversification, which I'll talk about next year. Go ahead, Jim. So tax diversification, it's critical, but we think about this through three buckets, and the three buckets are the tax-free bucket, the tax-deferred bucket, and the taxable bucket. So your tax-free bucket consists of a Roth IRA, a health savings account, municipal bonds, and home loans. Think of like a home equity line of credit. A tax-deferred bucket would be your IRA, your 401k, other types of employer-provided retirement accounts, and then annuities, non-qualified and qualified annuities. And then finally, the taxable bucket. So this is your traditional brokerage account, your joint account, your trust account. The key concept with here, the takeaway is not to have all your money in one single bucket, but to spread it out in multiple buckets. Not to put all your eggs into one basket, but spread it out into multiple baskets. So that's the kind of thing that we help our clients implement, is kind of spreading out their money into these different tax buckets. All right, so let's just start with the tax deferred bucket. So the way this works, again, your IRA, your 401k, you contribute to it pre-tax, so you get that upfront deduction. While the account stays intact, it grows tax-free, and then the IRS comes knocking on your door when you withdraw the money, and they tax that 100% as ordinary income. And then your heirs have to face that penalty as well, and they pay 100% ordinary income taxes on that IRA when they withdraw it. Some disadvantages with this type of bucket is you face a 10% early withdrawal penalty if you access that money prior to 59.5, and then you have required minimum distributions. Again, currently at age 72, proposed to increase to 73 and up until 75 in subsequent years. And then your Roth IRA has some similarities and differences to the tax deferred bucket. One distinction is you don't get that upfront tax deduction. You don't lower your taxes by contributing. Your account still grows tax-free, but because the IRS didn't get you that benefit up front, they're going to give it you on the back end, so your withdrawals are tax-free. And then your heirs also get to benefit from that. Their withdrawals are tax-free, so it's a good asset to leave to heirs. There's no required minimum distributions for Roth IRAs, and then as long as you hold the account for 5 years and access the money after 59.5, your withdrawals are tax-free. And then the final would be the taxable bucket. So similar to the Roth, your contributions are not going to get any type of tax deduction. Distinct from both of those two buckets is your capital gains, your interest, and your dividends are taxed annually. So your capital gains get triggered once you sell stock or bonds. So I'll give you an example. You buy Apple for $10,000, you sell it at $20,000, your capital gain is $10,000. Just say you're 15% long-term capital gains rate, your capital gains tax is $1,500. That $20,000 you sold it for, you're only getting $18,500 after the capital gains tax. So let's just say Bob bought Apple stock in a transfer of death individual account with Joan listed as the beneficiary. Joan is going to be able to essentially pick the fruits from Bob's labor because she's going to get the step up in cost basis. So that $10,000 Bob bought in Apple stock is now going to be pushed up to $20,000, and Joan could then sell Apple stock without any tax penalty. And a benefit of this is liquid. So you can access it prior to 59.5. Again, unlike the other types of retirement accounts, and there's no required minimum distribution, no early withdrawal penalty. So again, drilling back down to it, it's imperative to have money in all these different types of buckets. Go ahead, Jim. All right, so let's circle back to Bob and Joan and look at a few scenarios here. So Bob and Joan, they need $80,000 to meet their lifestyle needs. Of that $80,000, $45,000 is coming from Social Security, so their shortfall is $35,000. That's what they need from the portfolio. In their portfolio, they have $750,000 in the 401k in that tax deferred bucket and $250,000 in a Roth in that tax-free. So they were able to incorporate 2 out of the 3 buckets. So let's just say they take that $35,000 need from the 401k. As you remember, it's 100% taxable. As a result, they're going to be paying taxes of $7,388 as an estimate on that distribution, which leads them to only net $72,612, i.e. they don't meet their income goal of $80,000. So let's pivot to another scenario of the Roth. So you may be thinking, well, why don't they use the Roth IRA? withdrawals are tax-free, as he talked about, it would be great to meet their income goal. It'd be great to fulfill their shortfall. They can do that and not pay any taxes. The caveat is they just withdrew 14% of their Roth IRA, which is arguably their best asset. So we don't want to take too much out of their Roth IRA, especially in the early years. We want to preserve that account, preserve that balance, and let it accumulate over time, because it's so more advantageous to have in the later years and also for their heirs. So let's look at a final strategy here. Well, what if they take part from the 401k, part from the Roth? They blend the two accounts, not take from one, not take from the other. They incorporate both of the accounts here. They're paying minimal taxes of $1,350, and they're getting super close to their $80,000 income goal. And again, what they're doing here is they're not depleting the Roth IRA, which is something we want to keep for the long term. And they're lowering the required minimum distributions because they're taking out money from their 401k. So it's two benefits there for them by taking out from multiple buckets. Go ahead, Jim. All right, so putting this all together, start preparing well before retirement. Now, I'll go back to Jim's Mount Everest and Mount Whitney strategy here that he talked about. Someone doesn't wake up and say, I'm going to climb Mount Whitney, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. They train often years in advance and prepare themselves mentally and physically for this journey that they're about to go on, this endeavor that they're about to cross, essentially. So we think about the same way with your retirement. You shouldn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to retire. You need to strategically plan well in advance and prepare for this day so you're ready financially and mentally for this big milestone in your life. Preparing well in advance in retirement is something that we really harp on when we're talking to our clients. And then minimizing volatility during the retirement red zone. Again, it's critical to appropriately position yourself in those 5 years prior to retirement and first 5 years of retirement, managing that sequence of return risks, putting bonds and cash in your portfolio. Tax diversification strategies, spreading out your money into those 3 different buckets. You'll never know what life is going to throw from you. And it's nice to have a liquid source of funds that you can tap into. Maximizing your Social Security benefit. Again, it's not a black and white answer. It depends on the particular situation. There's a lot of considerations that go into that decision, and that's something that we help out with. And plan for the risks of retirement. All that risk that were talked about earlier, take those into account to make sure that downhill climb is not as bad as it could be. And then get solid advice from a professional. So that's where we come in with our collective experience, expertise, and knowledge to help you make informed and educated decisions. All right, take control of your retirement. So there's a few things we can't control and can control when it comes to retirement. First, we can't control longevity. We don't know how long you're going to live. The best we can do is make assumptions based upon your health history and longevity that's run within your family, and then use those assumptions and estimates to build a solid financial plan. We can't control tax changes. With all the proposals floating around right now and all the tax changes that have been enacted within the past couple years, it's unpredictable where Congress is going to lie. And inflation, we can't control the value of the dollar. We can't control how much that is being eroded away. The best that we could do is put stocks in your portfolio to give you that hedge to outpace inflation, so you're not worried about your money being lost to that economic indicator. And then health events. Again, no one knows how long we're going to live. We can't take anything for granted. The best that we can do is adapt and respond to the circumstances that life throws us. All right, things that we can control, your expenses. So helping you create a diligent spending plan where you're living within your means. You're not withdrawing too much of your retirement assets in one single year. And that's something that we incorporate with an income guardrail strategy, that tells you, hey, if the market's going up, we'll give you a little bonus. We'll give you some extra paycheck from your portfolio this year. Vice versa. If we see a decline in the market, you might have to tighten your belt a little bit. And that's something that we can coach you on. And then tax diversification. So again, putting those monies in the different tax buckets, minimizing the effects of inflation, incorporating stocks in your portfolio and other types of investments that will outpace inflation, how much risk you can take. So that's measuring your appetite and your willingness to accept risk and your capability or ability to take it on. So finding that blend where you feel comfortable that you can sleep at night, knowing you're invested in the market, and also getting you some growth on your investments. Making the most informed decisions. So being real methodical with retirement, pre-retirement, post-retirement to give you the most financial fulfilling life journey. All right, so how to get started. We alluded to it earlier, but in a few minutes, I'll send a link in the chat. And if you want to spend a couple minutes talking to Jim and I in the next couple days or next week, no strings attached, but we'll be able to kind of get a feel for what you're looking for in terms of an analysis of your Social Security and other types you might need help with your retirement. So I'll send that link shortly. Learn more about Anchor Bay and the follow-up. I'll include a brochure that spells out, this is who our company is. This is the services that we offer, so you can learn more about us and some of the things that we do for our clients, and then complete a survey. Again, we really appreciate your feedback and value it as it helps us become better presenters in the future. All right, from here, I'll turn it over to Jim to wrap us up and take us home here. Go ahead, Jim. You're on mute.
Okay, there we go. So just a couple more comments. You spend 80,000 plus hours working, going up that mountain. Why not spend a little bit of time working with a financial advisor to help get you down that mountain? Because, if you contact Social Security Administration, they're not going to tell you, oh, by the way, if one of you takes it at 62 and the other takes it at 70, that's your best outcome. They don't know. They can't give you advice on that. The IRS certainly isn't going to knock on your door and say, hey, by the way, if you had blended a Roth IRA and a regular IRA together, you would reduce your income for a longer period of time. They're not going to provide you tax advice. And as Blake mentioned, everybody's retirement income scenario is different. Your health history is different. Your goals and needs and wishes and wants are different. The assets you own. So, what you may hear, from your neighbor, your brother-in-law, or from Susie Orman or Jim Kramer may not be the best advice for you. It truly is customized. And that's the way we work. Everything is customized for your individual situation. So, if you want to have a consultation with us, if you're not working with us already, schedule it. We're not going to sell you anything. We're not going to give you any high pressure. We'll just have a conversation, provide you some advice. And we're very confident that the advice we give and our value proposition is strong enough that you may want to work with us and we could add you as a valued client. So I'm just going to leave you with two more thoughts. The first one is 1, that's the number of chances you get a successful retirement. I mean, there aren't do-overs in retirement when you're coming down that mountain, unfortunately. It's not like you can go back to the top and start over or go down the other side. You've got to get it right. So things like making prudent Social Security choices and minimizing that sequence of retirement risk, things like that. So, it's really important that you get this done right and you're thoughtful in your planning. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with a quote from a tax court judge. This was primarily related to taxes, but I think it's applicable to just about anything in your financial life. And so, there are 2 tax systems in America, one for the informed, one for the uninformed, and both are legal. So if you're more informed, you understand the way Social Security works and the options are available to you. If you understand how taxes work and how to tax diversify, if you understand how to minimize sequence of return risk, you're going to be certainly far more ahead of someone when it comes to financial security than someone who isn't informed about these things. And our job as a financial advisor is to help you be that informed person and make the best decisions for your individual situation.